Well, I'll tell you what, let's get it started. Since this is recorded and right now we're sort of in a webinar versus heavy collaboration stage. So thank you everyone for joining us today. So I want to give a little bit of a lead in, and then I'll introduce the other folks that are on the panel here. So, we are all spending a lot of time in the construction industry, either on the tech side, on the service side, or on the GC side. And we find that very often when we're talking about technology and we're talking about what we do, we're always talking about the happy stuff, like what something could do for you. But only once in a while do people get an opportunity to kind of gripe a little bit about what hasn't gone right, and kind of talk about some of the crazy stories and how maybe that could have been avoided or made less bad. So we thought we'd have some fun and call it group therapy. So it's exactly like it sounds, like a little tongue in cheek there. And we've invited, this is a collaboration between my company, The Link. We work on specs and dues. We'll talk a little more about that later. And Red Team, one of the, premier project management platforms out there. We've invited some folks from Blue Wave, a GC out in the West in Arizona, to talk a little bit about some things that have gone wrong and really kind of kick around how technology may or may not have helped that. But a lot of the fun here is just opening it up to stories about, you wouldn't believe what happened. You wouldn't believe this. And so folks that are on the call, you're probably going to say, yeah, I had one like that. And that's sort of the fun here, is like exploring how things actually go wrong, and in a kind of lighthearted way, with the goal of saying, great, well, what could technology have done? What doesn't technology yet help with that maybe it could one day? And what is just down to the practical reality of pulling buildings out of the ground? So I'm Hugh Seaton. I'm a CEO of The Link. We are a specifications management platform. Primarily right now, most people use this for submittal logs and for our product Spec GPT. Today's meeting is being recorded. This webinar is being recorded. We're going to make that available to everyone else, and if you signed up, you'll get an email. Well, actually, that's a good segue for me to ask the other two gentlemen to introduce themselves. Why don't we start with you, Will?
Yeah, I'm William Carpenter. I'm a senior project manager for Blue Wave General Contracting in Arizona. We're a true general contractor, commercial work. I've been a project manager for about 25 years, and prior to that, I was in the trades. I was a trim carpenter, and decided, I want to try my hand at being a project manager. So I went to ASU and got a degree in construction management.
And over to you, JJ.
Hi everyone, I'm JJ Levenske, and I'm the called the crazy guy that started Blue Wave 7 years ago. I had a similar background to Will, just kind of came up through the ranks. Started, it was a quintessential start in the field, go to superintendent, project manager, and next thing you know, took more responsibility than I probably should have, and I ended up in the corner office. And now I'm in therapy 10 times a week, as we talked about. But just happy to have all the attendees on, and looking forward to this topic. So thanks, Hugh.
Awesome. Well, why don't we start with, so look, man, we're going to have some fun with this.
Yeah.
JJ, why don't you kind of kick it off with...
Well, yeah, I think we should go back, just give the attendees, and please, you guys keep chiming in, talk on the Q&A, whatever. But what had happened was, we wanted to do this presentation. If I can go back to, we all met in Dallas earlier this year and talked about kind of doing this because we were at a Red Team function. Hugh fortunately has, again, with his company, The Link, utilized technology, AI, all the fun things that even Will and I, as two old curmudgeons in our 50s, we know that we have to, and we want to use technology to effectuate change in the horror stories that we're going to tell today, or kind of bridge that. But in context, I wanted to kind of just let the audience know that Will and I still see it every day. And I think what we need to understand is that we have to come back to, it's almost like the geopolitical scene in America right now. We need to come back to the centric view of this, of how do we collaborate, how do we work together? And I say that by giving you an example of, this isn't going to be a bashing of, Hugh on the tech side, us on the GC side. We should have had an architect probably on this forum as well. But when you look at the paradigm that's out there right now, let's start at where it all starts. That is capital, right? Every project starts with money, or the aspiration of doing something for a return on investment. So if you look at that paradigm and reverse engineer it, here's where we're at. So everyone's using technology. but at the front end, the capital really hasn't changed. You know, someone looks at a thing, says, "Hey, I want to do this capital project." They say, "Hey, I need $10 million." They go to a lender, maybe some part equity, part debt, and then they go out and say, "All right, well, how do we start this?" And they start it with usually going to a design firm. Sometimes it's design build, but for the sake of this story and this argument, let's start with it. They go to architect, engineers, and they put together a proposal on how they're going to do the design before they either go out to bid or they start negotiating with the general contractor. So we do that, but how do you think they hire those people? 90% of it is still fee-based or price-based instead of, yeah, there might be relationships, but let's be honest, they're not negotiating that, or if they say they are, they're really trying to get to a bottom line. So then take it further. If you're in an architectural firm right now, and we deal with them all day long, and for full disclosure, we do conventional construction, meaning where the architect is outside of our contract, or we do design build where they're in our contract. We don't have it in-house, but we partner with it all the time, especially on schools. We do a lot of design build. And therein lies the acrimony, is because that architect and those engineers now, and Hugh, you'll love this one, what do? They start building the concepts. That's the easy part. But when they go to the specifications and all the details, who's usually doing that? An AIT, an EIT, someone with very little experience. So think of their repertoire and their tool, and if you will, their treasure trove or chest of information. Other than the internet, they don't have the experience that Will and I were just talking about. Is we're two salty old dogs that have been doing this for 30 years. Is our experience is vast, and I can tell you the failures probably outweigh the successes. But we're here to discuss that. So again, what we're trying to look at, were they set up for failure or were they set up for success? Well, most likely they were set up for failure, whether that's, again, an engineer or architect, is they don't know what they don't know. And so they might go, you know, a classic example, Will, sorry, Hugh, you can talk to this later, of a standardized database of specifications that they have no clue about, right? So I'll give you an example that we just saw one the other day that Will handled, that I was copied on in an email chain, where this architect, they knew nothing about storefront or glazing, and they literally only had like 2 products in there that they could use, and all the bidders were like, "What is this crap? You know, why do you not have a larger repertoire or a pool to draw on?" Because they're all equal. I mean, the disparity between what someone lists and what's not listed is so stupid, because it's not, the arbitrage is not that far off. It's just they don't have access to it by utilizing a software or a system like what Hugh provides. So that to me is like setting up in this discussion today is, yes, we're going to go into some crazy stuff, but I don't want it to be about bashing the people that start this, which is the architects and engineers that put the plans and specifications together. Because in the design build role, a lot of times Will and I get to sit in those meetings early on where we have influence on those specifications, plans. In other words, we're kind of designing to a budget, but again, I get back to, if the budget is determined by people outside that circle of influence, typically it's already set up for acrimony. Hugh or Will, you want to chime in on kind of how I teed that up for the discussion?
Let me hop in on the specifiers, because that's something that's near and dear to my heart. You know,
Yep.
the average age of a specifier is 60. And, you know,
60.
yeah. And at least the data I saw when I was at CSI. So, you know, what you're really seeing is people that aren't specifiers writing specs. You know, like if it's a really big job and there's a lot of money in it, then you get one of those folks that are a little older, but by definition, well, not definition, usually they're more expensive. So typically it's someone who's an architect, or maybe not quite an architect, who doesn't do specification for a living and maybe not even understanding what specs are for. You know, the other thing you see, to your point, is very often when it comes to specs that come in from the trades, like from MEP, they're written by an engineer who no one has ever told how to do a spec, and no one has ever said, you know, a lot of the business terms are in Div 1. Like, you don't have to write general conditions for the electrical trade, which happens a lot. And it's just because, you know, they got senior and they're in their 30s or 40s, and suddenly it's like, you know, congratulations, you get to write the specs today because you have to stamp them. So I think that you're absolutely right. And it speaks to the fact that these are structural problems, not people being lazy problems. It's so yeah, you're right. There's no bashing. I mean, we obviously, people like to do that too, but there's no beer involved today, so we'll stick to down the
Well,
line. It's
hey,
just a
Hugh, let me
reality that
talk.
there's one last point here is that a lot of this is there aren't enough people for people to spend the time they wish they could doing things. So everyone's winding up spending twice as much time later cleaning up what would have been quicker if they'd had the time and budget to do it up front.
Right. Well, we wanted to jump into the horse race. I'm gonna stay on that kind of methodology, but in the I kind of like where we're going before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of the missed specs or plans or things like that. And that is, Will and I can attest that you brought up the MEP, which is a great example of. Remember that when that owner goes to the architect and they're putting their fee basis together, those architects go out to all their consultants to get sub bids from them as well. So now you're compounding the problem. So like you were talking, Hugh, is let's say I'm a fire sprinkler, which is in many states that's what we call the deferred submittal. But a lot of times, like you said, they're putting together just these blanket quasi down and dirty specs because they're not incentivized to do anything other than do the drawings, right?
Yeah.
Because look at that architect has now beat them up, just like the proverbial story of a general contractor beating up their subcontractors or trade partners. So by the time it comes out to bid, it's almost baked. You've already baked a load of crap into the documents or the contract documents for everyone to bid on or to review or whatever. So I think it's important for those people that don't understand that's a lot of what goes on at the early stages. So, but again, by the time it hits bid or the project conception, we've already created acrimony amongst the parties.
And so the question that today is about, and I'll hand it over to Will because I've been talking so much,
Yeah.
is we're dedicated on the spec side to helping people navigate the documents. And this is the same thing Red Team does even more broadly, is giving people better access to the information so they can get around the fact that maybe the original creation of the documents wasn't as good as it could have been. How do you make people able to quickly analyze and quickly review it and quickly find things that maybe are going to cause them heartache later? And that's sort of a lot of what we're hoping for. But Will, over to you.
Yeah, Hugh, we've got a question in the question and answer section. This one is from Cynthia. She says, this is a great topic. Hugh, later can you talk about how the link helps with a broader pool of specs for specifiers?
Sure. Actually, that isn't what we're really a little more focused on GCs. So
Okay.
in terms of we don't provide, that's a great question because it speaks to what we do and don't do. The link isn't actually a spec creation platform. That's that we're downstream of that. So you're assuming that you've either had your first 20% DDs or I mean, the point is they've already been written and we're helping people that are executing against them.
Okay.
Actually, I was just kind of passing it off to Will to do a little intro.
Well, I think it's fair to say that we had a kind of a golden age of specifications when we transitioned from the builder being more in charge. I remember just a few years ago, I got the chance to tour a building that was 11 stories high. When it was built, it was the tallest building in Phoenix. And the developer that we were working for on another project had purchased this building, and he wanted to know what he had bought. So he handed me the plans for the building. That whole 11-story building was built off of 28 pages, and it was built in the 1920s. And, so I wandered around an 11-story building with 28 sheets and just marveled at how this building had been built, the information that was in there. There were no specifications. Then we transitioned into this period where architects began to take more and more control of projects instead of the builders. And with that, they had to find a way to communicate more information that had been left up to the builders. And so we have specifications and we have the CSI divisions, and they were taken very, very seriously because the architects we're having to gather all this information that the builders used to have. You know, what kind of doors should we put in here? What kind of windows? What kind of glazing? What kind of, you know, caulking should we do here and there? And so the specs were taken very seriously. And then kind of what JJ said, you know, everything began to be kind of commodified, and everything became a commodity. And so architects, you know, were competing against each other to see who could come in with the lowest number. And so sometimes you wind up with, you know, funny things where a specification doesn't match the drawing. You know, there was a job we did recently where the specification called for TPO and the drawings called for coated foam. Well, you know, those are completely incompatible specs. And we went back to the owner and we said, look, we can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, let's not have this be driven by the specification. Let's have it be driven by the drawing, which shows coated foam. We saved the owner, what, $150,000, I think, on that on the roof for that project. And so having that correlation between the specifications and the drawings is really important. And especially on like a hard bid type job, you find that there are subcontractors that are just sharp as a razor, and they find those discrepancies, and they sure know how to use those. A lot of things that people who are newer to the industry don't understand is that we have a lot of case law built up that says your specifications, if there's a conflict between the drawings and specifications, and you know, you've got a subcontractor and they rely on the specifications, they're entitled to do that. So you have a lot of people in hard bid situations who know that, and they take advantage of it. So you can wind up with some real funny conflicts. You're better off resolving those earlier than later.
But it speaks a little bit to the fact that what's supposed to happen is the drawings are supposed to be pretty much where things go and how many, and with really generic descriptions. And people don't do that. Like you get specs in the drawings, you get writing in the drawing, you get lots of notes in the drawing, you get descriptions like that, which frankly shouldn't be there. But so what, they are. So you're right. And I think a lot of that has to do with specs being produced in a way that is a little sloppy, whether it's because it's save as from an earlier project, which happens obviously all the time, or people didn't update their master spec. Or the one that I love the most is where a master, you know, office spec or a master spec will have multiple options and they keep them all in there. You know, like 7 different ways you can, you know, inspect a thing or different types of product. I mean,
And
like,
we love bidding on those, Hugh.
yeah. Well, guess which one people are going to pick. But anyway, it just speaks to the fact that technology has the opportunity to fill in some of that, at least to detect it or allow a professional to go through things quickly. Because look, a spec for an 11-story building, depending on the building, is going to be 2,000 pages, unless it's a very simple building. So that's a lot to get through, and that's a lot to process when within one spec section, there's like 7 or 8 different types of content. So it's really hard to like line up in your head that I'm looking at what submittals are and I'm looking at what inspection is and I'm looking at the product. Oh, there's 5 product types. Oh, wait, actually it's a performance. So I need to think about what the performance is, not what the product. So it's a lot to be able to switch back and forth, you know, 20 or 30 times going through a project. So one of the things and you know, I'm speaking more about my product, but it's at least as true about Red Team, is a lot of it's organized to help people to do their job quickly and not have to remember all the details. One of the things that Michael from Red Team told me early is that, you know, he has his own contracting firm as well. And from the beginning, he was really focused on actually executing everything in a contract. And I think that's one of the things that distinguishes Red Team, right? Is it really guides a team to follow the letter of the contract without being overly constrictive. But I think it's something that is kind of unique about Red Team, in that it is about helping you to navigate all the little things that a contract might need, so that people don't necessarily have to remember it all. How's that sound?
Yeah, very true.
Very true. Hugh, as you were talking, I was thinking about trying to go kind of macro here, and bear with me because there's a circular point that I'm trying to make. Is I was just thinking about a very large project we were on last year. where I believe by the time we were done, the RFIs were in just almost under 1,000. And yes, we were using Red Team, but I sat there at the end of the project and thought, wow. And this was a multi-phased, contracted project, so we didn't have ultimate control, and the owner had it so bifurcated that it created acrimony. But a good point was on one of the phases alone, the plans and specs were on revision 13 while still under construction. That wasn't even at the end. And so by the time you can see by the time the RFIs, the change orders, and all these things they could never get caught up,
Yeah.
right? But it started because the plans and specifications were so poor, and that once that circle started, even with the effectuation of Red Team and some really intelligent people involved, quite honestly, it went back to, without casting blame, when I look at the owner and the consultants, they really could never come into harmony, even though we in Red Team and so the people that were very versed in doing it tried to keep the momentum and that pace up. It just kind of got off the tracks a little bit. And so, I get back to, we as a collective whole, can we do a better job up front of identifying those problems and putting that out into a conversation? And then, like you said, Hugh, can you extrapolate that into better contracts and then the communication on those contracts up front? So again, if we're there using all the fun technologies that you play in, whether that's AI and some virtual, as far as the virtual stuff and looking at collisions and BIM and IPD and those kind of things, that's where we try to encourage owners, hey, would you rather trip over the dollar to pick up the nickel, or do you want to invest the nickel to save the dollar? And I know that's an old cliche, but I see it time and time again.
What's the old, I was either Frank Lloyd Wright or one of the famous folks said, I can fix it with a pen or you can fix it with a jackhammer.
Yep. I love that one. I
Me
love
too.
that one.
Speaking of jackhammers, I'm not sure where I'm going with that segue, but bear with me. One of the things that we promised is some nutty stories. So I'm going to
Yeah.
throw it out to you guys. Now that we've sort of set up what we're doing here and obviously given away our opinions. Talk to me a little bit about even that story you just said, where you walked in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed to this project thinking, okay, we'll work well with those guys, and you see this horror show, and before you know it, you've got War and Peace of RFIs. Maybe that's the one, but talk to me a little bit about some just nutty things that you've come across.
Hugh, I've got a great one. This isn't too long ago, 2008. I was building a cancer treatment hospital, and the architect had specified an absolutely gorgeous saltwater fish tank in the lobby. It would be like the first thing that you saw as you walk through the door. And we contracted with an outfit back in Maryland to build this beautiful custom angled fish tank. And we sent them the plans, and they looked at them and said, okay, this is great. And a whole bunch of information went back and forth between the architect and the fish tank builder about, how it was going to be installed and everything. And this fish tank builder was kind of old-fashioned, and he used a fax machine, didn't use email very much. And so about 4 days before grand opening, the fish tank arrived, and we were assured 4 days is plenty of time to fill this up, temper the water, get the fish in there. It's going to look great. And it came in a huge crate, and we were all standing around, the superintendents and the project managers, to see this great fish tank. We uncrated it. It was in a wood crate. We uncrated it, and what should have been a 3-foot 4-inch tall fish tank was 34 inches tall. Because somewhere along the way, the foot and the inch marks had disappeared in the chain of faxes between the architect's office and this fish tank maker. And boy, did that thing look silly in the opening we had, which was 4 foot, like 4 foot 6 inches tall for a 4 foot 3 inch tall fish tank. It was 34 inches tall. Now, to their credit, The fish tank manufacturer said, hey, we'll take care of it. We'll make you the right one. You can transfer everything, and we'll find somebody to sell that 34-inch tall fish tank to.
So tell me that in your career, you never thought you'd have a Spinal Tap reference. I don't know if you
Spinal
remember-
Tap.
Yeah, in Spinal Tap, there was that movie, the movie, This is Spinal Tap. There was this one moment where they transposed feet for inches, and instead of having a big Stonehenge thing, it had a little pi sign. So it was like these two little things, and it looked like the sign for pi because it was this big instead of 12. It was really funny. So it was
Well,
12.
I guess that's a movie I'm going to have to go and see.
Yeah,
I guess I'm not quite old enough to have seen Spinal Tap.
apparently not. But JJ was laughing, so now we know.
Yeah. Hey, Hugh, it made me think of, and again, audience, please, in the Q&A or whatever, tell us your horror stories too, or question, or
Raise your hand.
pose it as a question. But while we're trying to get the audience engaged, I'll give two, both a recent one and an old one, but they tie, and that is when working with international companies or suppliers, because on that transposing of feet and inches, the metric and the UL listings and all that stuff. Oh my God, I could give you story after story, but it still happens. Like I go back to when I was in the mid 90s and I was working around the world doing petrochemical and food plants. And I'll never forget, we were down in Venezuela and things were coming in from all different parts of the world and aligning things and metric in different languages. Oh my God, Hugh, we would literally get this stuff in, uncrate, like to Will's point, uncrate it and go, oh crap, what are we gonna do? Find a local fabricator, and you're trying to align things like this, like
Yeah.
this, and it was just a disaster. And at that time, I think did we have internet? No, we really didn't have internet at the time. Emailing was just starting to get early on, but back to Will's point, it was still fax and paper and things like that. But now I switched to just last year, similar situation. We were dealing with a project where there was a bunch of stuff coming from Germany, highly sophisticated, very highly tuned. It wasn't, there were no issues on the QA/QC, but then when we weren't directly involved in this, indirectly we were, and it was funny, we were coordinating the inspections around there, and the inspector said, wow, all that stuff, does any of that have UL listings on it? Oh my God, that turned into a whole shit show where they had to get in all these independent third-party consultants to then verify it, go back to German standards, see if that align with ASTMs and UL stuff here in the States, to meet code, to meet safety requirements, all those kind of things. So that's another classic example of how, when dealing with our global economy, has anyone really bridged all the stuff that's coming from China? We see it a lot in the electrical switchgear type stuff. I know Will can attest to that, in submittals on electrical stuff, with all the problems in the supply chain that are going on right now. So a couple more examples.
Yeah. So I got a story from a little bit longer ago also. I used to translate specs from Chinese into English. And I'll tell you what, there's too many little stories. I don't have the thing blew up, but the number of things that we take for granted and how we describe them in one language versus another is hysterical. So one of the problems often is there just isn't a word for some things in another language. That happens a lot too. So they'll use something that sounds like this, something that sounds like the English word. So, I actually had this isn't such a funny story. We had a transposition once from an order, and it was 1.8, it was inches into metric. And we had two whole truck, containers of welding wire that had to be sent back to the factory because they were the wrong size. So you're right. It's nuts what can happen. Can you imagine these things got shipped from China to Taiwan to, I forgot where. And it's like, no, we needed 1/8 of an inch, not 1.8 or whatever it was, millimeter or centimeters, millimeters, I guess it would have been. So yeah, pretty crazy how just crossing borders. Yeah.
Hey, Hugh, like when I first met you and we kind of talked offline about all the AI stuff, I'm going to question you on something for the audience's benefit. Where do you see that AI can help bridge those issues?
It's a great question because I think we assume that all AI is one kind of thing. The most recent stuff, generative AI, has the benefit of being open to fuzzier inputs. So you can give it just a
Right.
document, it can do things with it. The problem is the outputs are fuzzy too. And we don't assume that, but we don't use software so we can get fuzzy answers. We use software so it can repeat the same thing a million times and always get the same answer. So the short answer is, if the problem happens often enough, you can create a system that will check for it. The hard part right now is, what you really want is something that can apply either common sense or some sense of what the world should be and say, well, this doesn't look right. Well, that whole thing about this doesn't look right is what AI is not good at right now.
Right.
It doesn't have a model of the world that it can like compare things to, which is exactly what intuition and experience gives you, is sort of this gut sense of how the world should be. So when it's not like that, you can say that, can you look into that? That doesn't look right. What it is able to do though is say, I've looked through, 1,200 pages or whatever it is, and I found this. Or you've uploaded a document of lessons learned or problems in the past, and I compared that to your current project, and I found some things that look similar. So what it can do, and the way I think people should generally think about, certainly the more modern generative AI, is it's good at getting you started. It's good at doing some of it so that you have to spend less time, but it's not replacing your effort yet. It's just replacing some of it. A human still has to eyeball it and catch things that were, in software, we talk about edge cases, things that don't happen very often. Again, that's where intuition and gut is really helpful, because it just doesn't look right, even if you've never seen it before. AI is still not so great at things it's never seen before.
Yeah.
It's good at a first draft. Same thing with writing, it's good at a first draft. It's usually not a good editor. You know what I mean? It's a good kind of spitting out a first draft and then you go and edit it. That's a good analogy for AI, just generally, is I think we look at it as if it were other software, where every time I press a button in Red Team, it's going to do the same thing. Every time you click a button in the link, it's going to do the same thing. When you're using AI right now, it's not going to necessarily do the same thing every time. Again, the strength of that is it can handle really nutty stuff. It can handle specs that are not well formatted, or that are missing something, or that have something weird about them. Whereas classic software struggles with that, but you just have to know that that's just getting you started. There's still going to need to be a human that's involved in it. So I don't know. I think what we're going to find over the coming year, they're getting, they being the kind of folks at the leading edge of this, they're getting better at having models that critique themselves, which is some of what intuition does. And I think you're going to find that in 2 years, it will be able to do some of this. It will be able to say that doesn't look right. Or, you know what, you gave me 15 projects to look at in the past, and based on that learning, I'm able to look at this new one and say, and ask you good questions. There's still absolutely going to be a role for humans just to catch, even as good as they get. We're still going to want humans around with the experience, intuition, and knowledge of the broader world. Like, the limits of software right now is you come to whatever the problem is with not just all of your experience, but you also know what, Fred over there and an adjacent trade said, or what's going on down the road. So then, which may or may not have been, all these things that may or may not have an impact on how a question should be answered. AI or all software is only ever looking at what you show it. It doesn't bring a whole lot with it. And whereas humans, we can't help it. We're constantly interacting with the environment around us, and we bring that to any problem, which is irreplaceable right now.
So, hey, Hugh, great. Thanks for sharing that, because, it was me kind of teeing it up for the audience because of our sidebar discussions. One of the things I thought of, though, is that, like, how do you get challenged as the CEO of the Link then? How do you get challenged on you and your product and your service? What am I trying to ask here? Like, how can you stay interactive to that without going into the abyss, right? Like, like any growth related company, it's always great to look at the vision and the mission and go off in utopian space, but you still have to stay somewhat in your lane to stay. Let's be honest, you got to be profitable. You have to provide a service and a product that can be monetized. Otherwise, not all of us can be nonprofits. How do you see the challenge for you in the Link of staying in that lane, but yet having an awareness of what's coming, like you said, in that 2-year nirvana?
Yeah, I think there's two things. There's one is, what are you doing right now? And
Yeah.
for us, actually, the deeper you get into a problem, the better you, I mean, this sounds like a fortune cookie here, the better you understand that problem. So for us, when we started with the link, we really were focused on, extracting things like submittal logs. And for people that haven't tried to build a product for that, at first it sounds like I'm going to make software that'll extract the perfect submittal log. I'm just going to use that as an example. The two problems with that, one is the underlying documents aren't that great, and they're highly variable, as we just talked about. The other thing is different contractors and different teams want different things. So there is no perfect. What there is let's create, and this answers your question, rather than worrying about AI that will automate too much, how are we making an experience so the team can really quickly go through and say, oh, you know what, this was weird. It wasn't right in the spec, but I want it in my submittal log. Or I want to be able to adapt this for how we want our submittals to work. An example there is we've had people who say, I want every product blown out as its own, set of requirements, whereas others are like, I don't want that many submittal items because I get, people look at how many are outstanding and I have to deal with that. Those are easy things for software to do if you know about it, but that's not AI. That's listening to people and saying, how do I give them toggles and switches so they can quickly get done what they want to get done? And it's not the same as someone having gone through and grinded and, cut and pasted into an Excel spreadsheet, but it's also not highly inaccurate and borderline unuseful if it had just done something automatically and you walked away from it. So you need to be able to automate a lot. What's the old Einstein saying, make it simple, but no simpler? That's that. And that line is from listening to people is, how do I make it so that I'm automating a lot of the really dumb stuff, but keeping the judgment and giving people tools to also not spend forever having to apply their judgment by hand, but how are we making that not really automated, but aided by software? The flip side of what you say is, we don't know when AI is going to be production ready for the sorts. So we use some of it, especially we have a backup. If the spec is so bad that our classic system won't see it, we have AI that will go look at it as well. So one way or the other, you're getting everything you need. It just has a reliability issue. When I was at Sony a bunch of years ago, we kept waiting for broadband for like 3 years. And it was like, tomorrow we're going to have broad. Same thing with HDTV. It's all going to be tomorrow. And it took 3 years longer than everyone thought. It was a really good lesson. And like billions of dollars were spent on laying pipe and specifically on laying fiber optics. And a lot of those people lost money because it didn't happen as quick as they thought. It's really important not to hang your hat on where technology might get. Like when it surprises you, like ChatGPT did, wonderful. You go in and you say, all right, this is as good as I can see. Let's see, we're going to build things around it. We have a chatbot. You can go chat with your specs. It's really helpful. It's really useful. But right now, counting too much on where AI is going to be in a year or two is just not a good idea, because it's not going to be linear. They're going to come up with weird innovations you didn't expect. Like just now, OpenAI came up with another thing that's the voice is better. Like that's wonderful, but it isn't helping me right now. It's helping consumers, and it's actually pretty cool. So they're going to innovate the way they think is necessary. It's up to us to build great products right now, based on how people really do their jobs, as opposed to where the AI might be. But in the meantime, I'm talking and collecting tons and tons of information that we can feed into AI when it's ready. That's kind of the balance. I think for you guys, I think for contractors, I think for Red Team, the way to prepare for where AI will get, we just don't know quite when, is to think about what knowledge you have that you can write down. So a lot of what we're talking about now with these stories, there's lessons learned you can usually pull out of those. Well, those can be consumed by an AI, again, a little bit now and definitely more later. That's not so hard to do. You can do that over lunch and have a little interview and kind of, jot down lessons learned and hopefully maybe index them against the spec section or master format section or something. That's where AI is going to be really valuable at the contractor level as well as at the software company level, is being able to take these lessons, feed them into an AI, and have it say, it looks like these two are connected, and serve it back to a PM or PE or somebody to say, you might think about this because this looks like it happened 10 years ago.
Yeah, let me take that one step further. Will wasn't involved, but just in the last week, I was involved with a kind of a think tank in our fraternity, sorority, call it what you want, of exactly what you were talking about, but instead of on the spec side, Hugh, it was on the estimating side, and looking at how they're starting in certain trades. Because remember, you bring it up, data, 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 data. Okay. Whereas think of a general contractor where there's all these things where it's gross generalization, right? But they're using the beta that they're using is like flooring, tile setting, things that have much more finite parameters, where they're showing how that can be extrapolated in with AI to show a tighter range of, because estimating is all about, can you control your fade, or can you control the disparity between actual and virtual, if I'm using the words right. Because remember, that's how it is, you know, because look at us, anybody in the trades or contracting, if you're on the plus side of that, hey, you make more money. If you're on the negative side of it, oh crap, you know, we went into our contingency or we lost money. So it was very interesting, but it basically advocates and validates exactly what you're saying is the data is driving it right now, but then the generative side of, can it then connect some other dots to then do the prediction thing? It was very interesting because I really enjoyed how everyone was throwing darts at it in a constructive way of, well, can it do this? And the experts said the same thing that you just got done saying is, listen, everyone, don't get so fixated on it, okay? If it solves a little bit of your bandwidth problem right now, then utilize it. But then be open to what it can do in the future with more data and more structures and more. I like what you said is, can it connect two more dots 2 years from now? If it does, great. You'll be ahead of your competition.
You know, an example from estimating is a really good one. Is sometimes there in Div 1 there are clauses hidden that are like, if you think about it, that's a full-time person, right? Like whether it's
Or
you know,
department.
or that's right. That's right. And you know, if you are a smaller contractor, sometimes you're, and subs, this is especially true, you may be assessing an awful lot of contracts to get at where you need to go because they're smaller or whatever it might be.
Yep.
And you don't have a big team and so on. So being able to train, you know, as you learn things or just from your own experience to say, hey, can you go look through this and see if you found this clause or that clause? That's something you can do right now. I mean, there are products out there that allow it, but that'll do that. They're, you know, varying levels of expense, but some of that you can do even with just off the shelf tools to just say, hey, can you summarize what risks are in here? It's not going to do to the point you made. It'll get you started. You're still going to want to look at it, but if it's collecting the easy stuff so you have mental bandwidth left for the not so easy stuff, that's a win on its own. And it just means you have time to handle more of them, which is, I think, another big bottleneck is it just takes a lot of time to assess what's going on.
Hugh, I don't know if it popped up on your screen. Cynthia's got another question if you want to read it here.
Sure. Why don't you talk about something else and I'll read the question.
Well, here I'll give another example of one in generalization. If we get back to the core of the struggle between crazy stories is, Will's going to laugh at me at this one. To this day, still, let's say we get a set of plans and specifications. You go to the architectural will reference a structural detail. You go to the structural detail, it'll reference the GSN, which is the general structural notes. The general structural notes will reference the general architectural notes. And by the end of it, you've now reviewed 7 different documents, and it's one big circle jerk to nowhere. Will, I'm sure you see.
Yeah, totally agree with you there, JJ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and we never get mad at it. You know, a lot of times we're very polite with and this is where the red team comes in, you know, it basically turns into an RFI. And a lot of times the consultants just, you know, they're not mad either. They just laugh. You're like, yeah, we missed it. We just used a standardized. They admit it. They're like, hey, we just use a standardized block. We put it in there. We didn't review it. Okay, well, what's the answer? And then the irony, though, this is where I really think it's funny, is it's nobody's fault anymore. And where I'm going with this is more and more and more and more, we have to put in everything as third-party inspections, third-party verifications. And as you're trying to explain that to the owner or even municipalities, inspectors, regulatory people, it's no one wants to take responsibility. It's this never-ending shielding of not blame but responsibility. And it's kind of comical because now when we're doing job closeouts, it seems like our third-party verification submittals are almost equal or greater than what the core scope and project is. Will, I mean, you know what I'm getting at here.
Yeah, absolutely. You can sometimes spend 2 and 3 weeks just chasing all of the certifications to prove that you built the job exactly as the structural engineer said it should be built.
Hey, Hugh, you want to?
Yeah,
Cynthia?
so we had a fun question that is really for Will also. What do you do when the architect has, or the project manual requires so many submittal items that, you know, and all of them are required, but they're like too many, that it's unrealistic? You know, how do you manage that when they're asking you to just, and it actually, this feels a little bit like what you just said, where in this
Yeah.
case, you guys were talking about a subset of that where they want, you know, 40,000 certifications. But, you know, I mean, is there scope to turn back around and say, you know, can we group some of these? Do you need all this?
Yeah, absolutely. What I've done with that in the past is you create a submittal log, and generally just
Good
an Excel.
idea, by the way. Good
Yeah.
idea.
And you go through the specs and you say, okay, I'm seeing that these are all the things that the architect's specifications say that they want to see. And 9 times out of 10, actually 100% of the time, every single time I've done that and sent that back to the architect and said, I've gone through your specifications. Your specifications say these are all the things you want to see.
Yeah.
I
Are
have
you staffed to see all these
yeah,
things?
exactly. I have never had the architect come back and say, yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
100% of the time, the architect has come back and they'll have redlined 50, 60, 70% of their required submittals and said, we don't want to see those. Just send us these instead.
Yeah.
And with that, you really get to the core of the things that are important that the architect wants to see. Basically, you're just putting it back on the architect. You're saying, hey, you said you want to see these. Do you really? And I
Well,
guarantee no
yeah.
architect is staffed where they want to see 100% of what they're claiming they want to see.
Let me add to that, because like let's take our roles in a project. So on larger projects, you know, in my role as the president, I'm still actively involved, where Will is really running it as a project manager. But back to me talking more on the economics and the relationship side with either an owner or architect, Will might tell me this and I'll go, hey guys, let's have a talk. And I'll go, hey owner, hey architect, do you see what the problem is here? Do you really have the budget for all the CA, which is the contract administration with under the architect's proposal? And they'll go in there and they'll be like, oh crap. And the architect will actually go, oh my God, you guys just saved us a huge embarrassment, because we would have needed 4 times the budget in our CA to handle all that. So yeah, now that you guys brought it to the table, we now don't have that acrimony between us and the owner. So it was us solving that problem for him. Now, granted, we had shameless self-promotion in it too, because we don't want to do all that extra work without it
Right.
either. So
Right.
it
Yeah.
saved all 3 parties wasted time, back to Cynthia's questions.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
they are in the game of CYA.
Yeah.
Exactly, Tracy.
Well,
Hey, go ahead.
also, just real quick, this isn't a great example though of folks taking what's from the last project or in some master spec and not having the time or the experience, to the point you made earlier, maybe not knowing what they're asking for. Then
Yeah.
the senior person says, whoa, you know, how'd that get out, you know, how'd that leave the office? I think what I've heard a lot is when architects suddenly have an extra week, things that they had issued, they take back and make a bunch of changes. Like it's just always, when there's more time, it's like, yeah, we didn't catch that the first time,
Yep.
but you know, there's all these changes, and it just speaks to the fact that there's not enough time and not enough money.
Well, so on that, a lot of time, Hugh, I'm going to jump around. I'm going to tie what you're talking about to how I want to address Cynthia's second question. And that is, I think we've taken a more active role in trying to get, even if we haven't won the job, almost like a pre-construction meeting. Now, not everyone will agree to it, and I don't mean a pre-construction in a tangible sense, almost like in a pre-negotiation meeting. So what you talked about was a good example. I was thinking of, Will, we just had a recent one. It was a repeat client. They had exercised a new architect that we had never worked with before, and I kind of put a timeout. I called the owner and said, hey, owner, I think it would be worth maybe a half hour, 45-minute meeting between us and the architect. And I'll tell you why. we know you, we've worked with you on repeat projects, and you did not do a good job of explaining to the architect how you operate as an owner. Can we jump in here? Because here's what it's going to do. It's going to save you money. It's going to save us time and money as your GC, and it's going to prevent acrimony for the parties further on. They agreed to it. We went and met, and it was like someone had a group hug from like a utopian group hug, because at the end, the architect came up to our team and said, "Thank you so much. We would have wasted all this time on this stuff, and you guys helped bridge that gap." Okay. Now Cynthia on her last thing says, also, it'd be great to see you guys team up again in the future and talk about how a GC can transition into a negotiated contract space. If I can, Hugh, I'd love to just take
Go for it. Well, here we
Yeah.
are.
So Cynthia and anybody else in the audience, for full disclosure, we as Blue Wave General Contracting, we play in both, we hard bid and we do negotiated. Now, I will say in our hard bid market, we only hard bid things that are maybe 2 to 3 contractors and less that are invited. We don't play on the public space. But even in that, back to this, kind of the nucleus behind this conversation today on plans and specs. We recently had one. It was a very large job, and the plans and specs were probably some of the worst I had seen in 2 years. Okay, and we internally, meaning Will, I, and another person on our team, we looked at it and said, "Hey, do we want to pursue this anymore?" And we said, "Yes, we're going to, because we think we can try to convince or show the owner our expertise, almost like use that negative as a positive. If the other contractors take a position where they're just going to go after it on price, back to Will's point, and try to change order them to death, scare them, we looked at it differently, where we said, hey, we submitted our bid, but then we also quantified it, kind of wrote a nice narrative, not too long, but long enough to put poignant things in there saying, listen, here's a good example. Your plans and specifications are so weak, and this is no disparagement to the architects and the consultants, but here's our low bid, here's our high bid. You can see that there's a 300% swing in this. Now, do you think that either one of those spectrums is the right answer? No, the answer is in the middle, in a gray area. So we then said, hey, what if we did this? You see our fee in this hard bid proposal. What if we went into a cost plus with this kind of percentage, which was an increased percentage on us, and we told them their incentive to paying us more money was that we would give them all the buy down back into the project. And I gave an example of how they would save maybe $500,000 if they went with our approach, versus I said, if you go down the path you're going down, I guarantee you're going to get change orders close to $1 million. And now that opened up the dialogue for a negotiation. Now that's still ongoing, so I can't give you whether that was successful or not. But to Cynthia's point, that's how we approach negotiation, is instead of getting pissy with it, always look at how whatever's failing, back to why we're here on this call, whether it's specs, plans, the communication of it, if you can extrapolate that information and put it into a solution for your potential owner, that's how you negotiate. At least that's how we take the position of negotiating.
That makes sense. And it speaks to the value, again, of really having as complete and flexible an understanding of what's going on as possible. Yep. Whether it's, from our system, from your own experience, from Red Team, what you just described is a much more three-dimensional view of how their money's going to get spent, which I got to imagine, certainly in a negotiated arrangement, is they're open to. But I think you've got stories where you've gone back to the architect and said, hey, we found all this stuff. We've got option A or option B, and they're like, now we'll take option A. Right. I know I've heard that a few times where people have come, and I'm assuming it's more of a hard bid situation, where people have suggested ways of changing, and the architect will say no, or someone, whether it's the architect or the owner, will actually not think like that. How often have you found that sometimes some relationships, you come with a good idea and they're like, thanks, but no, we're good where we are.
Yeah, I've got an example of that immediately. Yeah. We're building a project for a municipality. We're under a construction manager, and we built one of the buildings for them, and we suggested that the kind of footings that they had weren't the right ones, and they could save thousands of dollars. if they built the second building using a different footing system. They came back and said, no, thank you.
Yep.
We're going to stick with this one.
Tracy in the audience, it's talks about negotiated space and it takes trust and experience. Absolutely. I can't discount it enough. But on that though, you have to be, and this is not only for Tracy, my response is, when I was younger, I think your thrill of the win sometimes defeats the purpose of it. So sometimes no is your best answer. Because a lot of times if you say no, they'll come back with their, hey, we made a mistake. Can we hire you the next time? Okay. I mean, it works. Will and I have been around long enough to say sometimes walking away, whether it's price-based, whether it's trust-based too, is if they think they've got a better solution, then take them. And guess what? You're not always right either. I mean, we have to look in the mirror. Will and I do all the time going, hey, what did we screw up on? How can we improve and make it better? But no, Tracy, you're spot on. Trust, and experience. Remember, and don't be condescending when you're in the negotiation thing. Be the expert, but try to think of it in their eyes all the time. Will, if I can use you an example, Will's one of the smartest guys I've ever worked with, and sometimes like Will, don't give him the Encyclopedia Britannica in your space, even though Will's like a savant when it comes to construction technology, and like be relatable, even though you know it to the IQ level of this, dumb it down so that they understand the why. Because remember, they don't care about the what, they care about the why.
I love that. Be relatable. I am relatable. What are you talking? They're idiots.
Just tell a dad joke. It'll take care of it.
That's right. Well, guys, we're coming to the end here. I want to thank you both for a really fun conversation. We've got time for one last question. If there's anybody that wants to pop something in, we'd be happy to answer it. Otherwise, I think we're going to thank everyone. So to remind you all again, this recording will be made available to everybody that was on. You're welcome to look at it, pass it around.
For the audience sake, I run a weekly podcast called Mac and Blue, MAC, and then the amber sign and BLEU. And it's non-proprietary. It's about our ethos, and our MO is that we try to do talks about building the future. And it's not just AEC space, it's also all the technologies. Typically we have guests on like Hugh that talk about all the cool things that are happening on the periphery of our business, our world, and trying to pay it forward. So if you want to follow along, please do. We're really excited about upcoming guests and past episodes. So it's just our platform to share and pay it forward in our community.
And thank you to the Red Team folks for resharing, because how many tech CEOs does it take to share a slide? If you'd like to learn more, check out the QA on the left, and just go to my website, thelink.ai, to learn more about specs and so on. And if you want to transform how you guys run your projects, go check out Red Team.